Hello again. We are back for the last part of this first day of the KAUST workshop WISER 2022. So we're starting our journey today from women in science, engineering and research in Asia. Then we move through Europe and Saudi Arabia. And now it's time to move more west, with a female scientist in the US. And our first talk will be by Jen Heemstra. Jen, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, I can see you, I can hear you. That's great. When you are ready, can you share your screen?
All right, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, we can see it. So that's great. Thank you so much. So thanks for accepting our invitation. We're really happy to have you here and looking forward for your talk. So when you're ready, you can start.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to the organizers of this event for the opportunity to join you. I love how you've traveled the globe with speakers as the sun kind of rises on different parts of the United States. And so I'm located in Atlanta in Georgia in the southeast corner of the United States. And I saw that your next speaker is Kristen Hutchins in Texas. And so you'll get to continue your journey. And I think you'll also see a little bit of a parallel between our talks in that we both love working with molecules and work in this area called supramolecular chemistry. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about both the research that my lab does and also the journey that I've taken to get here. But before I do that, I wanted to start with a question. And this is a question that I get asked often. And that question is, are you always this enthusiastic? People who know me well know that the answer to this is yes. I am 98% of the time this enthusiastic, but what many people don't know is the reason why. And a lot of that reason why is because these are the people that I get to work with every single day, that I get to go into this building and spend my day working alongside just the most incredible group of colleagues in my lab. And they are just so creative and driven and fun and caring and kind. And that's really what makes my life so much fun and what has made my career so much fun. And what most people don't know as well is how I got here. And so I wanted to share a little bit of that story as well. That I never thought I would be a chemist in high school. I loved science, but nothing about high school chemistry made me want to be a chemist. My freshman chemistry class did absolutely nothing to change that. But then, a few years, decades ago, about 25 years ago, I found myself in college and I was a year and a half in, and I had thought I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I was going to go and be a doctor. But about a year in, I realized that was not what I wanted to do. So I knew what I didn't want to do, but I didn't know what I did want to do. But I found myself through a series of coincidences with the opportunity to work in a research lab of Professor James Noack, who's seated kind of down in the front here. And so here I was, an undergraduate student working in this lab, and whoops, I don't know how I did that. And I was having a blast at research. I was like, okay, I love working in lab. I love what I'm doing. I said, this isn't like what I want to do with my life, but I'm having a blast. And I don't know what I want to do with my life, but this is fun. So let's just kind of keep doing this. And the thing that was so transformative is that before I even had the words for it, I had fallen in love with this field of supramolecular chemistry, which is basically just building with molecules. And so supramolecular chemistry is based on the principles of molecular recognition and self-assembly. And this is how I viewed chemistry, right? It opened my eyes to realize, okay, molecules are kind of like these little, really small, excuse me, Lego bricks. And just like, you know, Legos have these bumps and holes that allows them to fit together, molecules are the same way. They have these different shapes, they have hydrophobic pockets, they have hydrogen bonds, they have ionic interactions, excuse me. And we can take advantage of all of these in order to allow molecules to fit together in specific ways. And exactly like these Lego bricks, we can do assembly. And so we can make them fit together in certain ways, and we can have a design in mind, and then we can build up molecules in order to make something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so this polar bear here, you know, it's pretty, excuse me, pretty cool looking. But if you think about it at a molecular level, it is molecularly the exact same as just like a bag full of Legos. But because someone has taken advantage of these recognition elements, excuse me, whoops. But because someone has taken advantage of these recognition elements and had a design going into it, they've been able to create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And this is how we approach thinking about molecules. And somewhere along the line, we came to appreciate that biomolecules, the nucleic acids and proteins, and especially nucleic acids, are just the coolest Lego bricks ever. And so this is how we view research. We love thinking about how we can take advantage of nucleic acid molecular recognition in order to build up these kind of cool architectures. And there's two reasons why we came to love nucleic acids so much. The actually more important reason is the less obvious one, and that is that nucleic acids have this really unprecedented synthetic accessibility. That if you think about it, if you've ever ordered a DNA primer, that feels like this very basic, simple thing that you would do. But what you're actually doing is ordering a multi-kilodalton sequence-defined organic polymer. And that multi-kilodalton sequence-defined organic polymer gets delivered to you often overnight, though not right now because of supply chains, but often overnight in very high purity for just a few dollars. And so that's absolutely mind-blowing. And the other thing that we love about nucleic acids is that, of course, they're just so privileged for molecular recognition that Watson-Crick-Franklin base pairing is extremely, extremely high fidelity. This ability of A to pair with T or U and C to pair with G. And if you're wondering, what is the difference between Watson-Crick base pairing and Watson-Crick-Franklin base pairing, it turns out they are exactly the same thing, just now with more equity added. And so this is a movement by a group of us in the chemical biology field in order to write back into history the names of people who have been unjustly written out. And so if you work with nucleic acids, we invite you to join Team WCF. Membership is easy. You just use this terminology wherever your papers are submitted, wherever your posters and talks are presented, and wherever your grants are being reviewed. And no matter what field you're in, I want to encourage you to think about what names are missing. Wherever there's names attached to things in your field, are there some names of people who really contributed, but those names have been erased or not given the credit they deserve? And can you do your part as well to write those names back into history? And so if we think about what nucleic acids are really capable of with that Watson-Crick-Franklin base pairing, an illustration I like to use is the one here, that as a supramolecular chemist, something that we often, kind of think about doing is designing two molecules that can selectively find and bind to one another. And I would argue that nucleic acids are the only type of molecule where it is completely trivial to do that. That, you could, during my talk here, sit down and type out a random string of A, T, C, and G. You can hit a little button on the website that says create complement, and you can design those two molecules in about 15 seconds, send those sequences off, receive them back as actual, physical samples, and then you can throw those two molecules into a solution with a virtually infinite number of nearly identical molecules. And those two polymers that you designed in 10 seconds or less are going to find and bind to each other with extremely high fidelity. and good affinity as well. And so we're quite fascinated with this, but what we're actually even more fascinated by is the ability of nucleic acids to have this same type of recognition with things like small molecules and proteins. And so we do a lot of work with sequences that are called aptamers, and these exist in nature, and they can also be evolved in the lab in order to bind to specific small molecule or protein targets, things like drug molecules or toxins or metabolites. And similarly, you can then throw these into very complex mixtures, things like human blood serum or cell lysates, or even live cells or environmental samples. And they're going to find and bind to their target also with really good affinity. And there's more. Often, they even kind of change their conformation upon binding, and that allows us to transduce those binding events into a measurable output. And so there's a lot of really neat things we can do with this. And so this is a little bit of a snapshot of, basically why nucleic acids are just the coolest Lego bricks ever. And the way we view research is all based on thinking about how can we take advantage of these properties and capabilities in order to build functional architectures that address some unmet need in society. And so this is how we view research, that everything starts with biomolecular recognition and assembly. Our lab slogan is biomolecules do amazing things. And then we look outward and say, where is there some unmet need, in biomedicine or in the environment? And then we bring together our interdisciplinary team of people and say, well, what is the best way to address this need? And then the last question we ask is, well, what techniques does that require? And are those things we know how to do? Or is it something that we should learn or find a collaborator for? And as a result of that, we end up drawing techniques from all across these different fields. And this is really something that I love about this field of supramolecular chemistry and chemical biology, that we're really focused on solving problems. And we can use whatever tools we need in order to do that. And so we're able to just keep learning new things from, we're doing round bottom synthesis for organic chemistry, we're doing cell biology and molecular biology, we do a lot of analytical work. We're using materials characterization techniques like TEM and DLS. And most recently, we recognized a need that required us to get into education and psychology research. And so we were fortunate to find some wonderful collaborators to work with on that as well. And so this is what our lab looks like right now. But this begs a little bit of a mechanism question, right? I'm a chemist, so we think about mechanisms, which is, how did I go from here down to here? You might be tempted to think, oh, well, she started working in a lab, realized she loved chemistry, decided she wanted to be a professor, and just kind of like did the PhD and then the postdoc and then got a job, and it was all great. But that actually could not be further from the truth. The real truth is that, pretty early on, about a year into working in the lab, I said, oh, maybe I do want to do this as a career. I had no idea how to get there. And pretty early on, I recognized that this is the job I really, really wanted. I looked at what my advisors were doing and thought, gosh, that just looks like so much fun. You're able to be creative, you have tons of autonomy and freedom, and you get to teach and mentor students. What an amazing job. But for about 10 years, from soon after starting research until literally right before I applied for jobs, I knew that I wanted this so badly, but I was convinced that it was absolutely unattainable. And there were a lot of reasons for that. I had massive self-doubt. I said, I just look at what my advisors do, and there's no way that I could do that. I'm not as smart or creative or capable as them. And they seem to do it all, but I need sleep, and they seem to sleep, but I wouldn't be good enough and I'd never be able to sleep. And it was just really, really challenging. There were a lot of challenges in my way. But I had really outstanding mentors. And if there's maybe one takeaway, it's always find outstanding mentors, because this is what made all of the difference for me. And so a few snapshots of that are that as an undergraduate, I was working for James Noack at UC Irvine, and no one in my family had really approached college in a meaningful way. Certainly nobody was a scientist and nobody had gone to grad school. And so as I was working in lab, I thought, well, maybe I could be a chemist, I could get a job in industry. And James said, you really should think about applying for grad school. And I said, LOL. Actually, I didn't say that. That phrase didn't even exist then, but I probably laughed out loud. I said, are you kidding me? I look at the grad students in this lab and there's no way I could do what they're doing, right? I would never get into grad school. And even if I did, there's no way I could be successful there. But thankfully, James just kept saying, just apply, just apply. And the grad students in the lab said, you'll figure it out as you go along. And so I applied to graduate school, thankfully got in, found another phenomenal mentor in Jeff Moore at the University of Illinois. And Jeff did so many extremely important things for my career. But one I wanted to highlight here is a story of allyship. That on the morning of my thesis defense, so I did the whole grad school thing. I almost quit a ton of times, and Jeff is the reason that I stuck around. But on the morning of my defense, I had a postdoc lined up, and I got a call from my putative future advisor. And they even knew it was the morning of my defense. And this is like back in the days when cell phones like weren't a thing. So I was like literally on a lab phone that was like connected by a curly cord to the wall, like standing in the middle of the lab, people walking around me. And this professor said, I know I offered you that postdoc position, but I've been thinking about it. And, we do organic chemistry and you're a woman and you might get pregnant. And so I need to take back my offer. I can't take the risk that you would be out of lab for that time. And I didn't even know what to say. I was devastated. Like this was one of the first, I had dealt with some stuff, but this was one of the first moments where I realized, wow, being a woman in this field is probably going to have some challenges. And so I finished that phone call, held it together, and then just started bawling and walked into, first door I walked in was Jeff's office right down the hall. And he knew it was coming. He had tried to talk this person out of making this decision, and he was really angry about it. And he just looked at me and he knew what had happened. And I'll never forget what he said, because this is such a beautiful picture of allyship. He said, we have to create a path. He said, we're going to find a way. He said, yeah, it may not work out with this person, and that's probably for the best. And it turns out that was really for the best. If I had gone to work for that person, I probably would have quit science. But he said, we can't tell you that you can have this career and then not create a path for you to get there. And we are going to create that path. And he did. And I will never forget that. I ended up going to work in industry for a couple of years. But then after that, landed a postdoctoral position with David Liu at Harvard, who I'd known for quite a while. So it's kind of the power of networking, that I had met him when I was just starting grad school and we had stayed in touch. And as it turned out, we actually did eventually have a baby. I found out I was pregnant the week we moved to Boston. And so my first conversation with David, basically was, hey, so I've got some news. It turns out that we're going to have a baby about 8.5 months. And David was great. Again, this is the power of great mentors. He said the one and only perfect thing that an advisor can say, which is congratulations, that's great. We're going to make this work out. But this added a complication in that, as I continued to think about this job that I wanted, I said, I so desperately want this job in academia, but I just don't think I can balance everything. I had no role models, no one I knew who had this job and had kids before tenure, let alone before starting this job. I now know there were a few women out there, but none that I knew of. And I was terrified of failure. I said, this isn't like a job you take on casually, right? But David and all of my mentors really just got around me and said, sometimes if this is what you really, really want, sometimes you just have to go for it. And so I did. I had to get over my fear of failure. I had to say, I may fail massively at this, and it may be like a real big public failure, but I've got to go for it. And thankfully I did land a job. This led to another terrifying moment when I then walked into my office on my first day, and because I had decided so late in the game to apply, I had cobbled together these proposal ideas that I thought, goodness, these are hopefully good enough to get me a job, but they're not like good enough to be things that we actually probably want to do. So then I sat there in my office and thought, okay, I've got this job in a lab. What do we actually want to do? And this is a pretty terrifying moment, but also a really great one, because sometimes approaching things in a different way leads to better. And the better answer was, well, recruit really great coworkers and foster an environment that promotes creativity. You know, give them the environment they need to be their best. And so from day one, the people in the lab have been driving the ideas of everything that we work on. And it turns out they have, well, this is totally obvious to me, that they have way better ideas than I have. And so approaching science in this different way has actually led to better success in research and in funding for our lab. So sometimes different is better. And so I really just wanted to finish by highlighting what that has looked like over the years. That from our earliest days, one of the projects that we were interested in was thinking about using these aptamer sequences to measure the enantiomer purity of small molecule mixtures so that we could then accelerate the evolution of enzymes for biocatalysis, create more sustainable pathways for the synthesis of pharmaceuticals. And Trevor, up on the top there, started this project, and then Alex really innovated with how to generate these biosensors. Amy was the person who made that happen, and now Bria is carrying that forward and thinking about how to blend catalysts and binding agents in order to accelerate reactions. We had this other idea with the collaborator Julie Holian on how to label and image RNA inside of living cells. And that was started by the first postdoc in our lab, Ashwini. You know, I had a thought about how we could do this. He and his collaborator, Josh Plant, another postdoc, came to us and said, here's a way better way to do it. And we said, oh my goodness, yes, that is way better. And then T came up with an even better way. And now Diane is continuing to innovate in that area. And then, you know, we started thinking about RNA editing. And one day, Steve Knudsen came to my office and said, hey, I have a new research idea. By the way, this project's already working really well. You want to hear about it? I was like, okay, yeah, that would be great. And he had this great idea of using this protein, ENDO-V, as a recognition element for this modification in RNA in order to be able to map the modification, do all sorts of things. And now Alex is carrying that into cells, and Ansley is doing structural biology work to further improve this system. And I could just tell you story after story. We got interested in these aptamer functionalized membranes for water purification, and that was started by Missile, and now is led by Kristen. We started thinking about how peptide nucleic acids could be used to kind of encode both nucleic acid and protein languages for assembly. And now, and similarly, was started by Colin and has now been led by Hector and Rachel and Sierra. And then I mentioned it, a little while ago that we've even gotten into this education and psychology research, and that is part of a really large collaborative. But the postdocs who have made that happen are Meredith and Shayla, who initiated that work. And I could just tell you story after story after story about how I work with absolutely amazing people. You can tell from these pictures that we also love to have a lot of fun. And I never would have been here if I had let my fear of failure control my actions. And so as I was thinking about, what advice I would give to my early career self, it's really this, that it's easier to live with failure than regret. That unless you're, Alex Arnold and you're like free soloing El Capitan or something, failure is rarely the end of the road. You can recover from failure, but it is really hard to live with regret over what you never tried. And so I never thought I could be where I am. I've failed and continue to fail in some really, really painful ways. Actually, it was a really, really huge, like the worst day of my life, worst day of my career, that became the most important day ever for me and really drives a lot of what I do now. And that all centered around a huge, huge failure. But no matter how big the failure, even on that worst day, it was still better than having to live every day wondering what might have been possible if, I had just tried, and knowing that I missed out on something because I was afraid of failing. And so with that, I want to again just thank this incredible group of people that I get to work with every day. They drive the research ideas, they do the experiments, they create an inclusive environment in our lab that just makes it such a fun place to work. And I'm extremely grateful for all of our current members and our alumni. And thank you so much again for the opportunity to join you for this phenomenal symposium today.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting and inspiring. Do we have any question in the audience? Okay.
Hi, Jennifer. My name is Yasmin. I love your excitement. It's so contagious. But I had a question about, you mentioned that mentors were really important in your life, and you also mentioned networking. So I have two kinds of questions. So how do you keep your relationship with mentors after you leave the lab, right? And also, how do you keep that network alive, right? So I saw that one of your networking opportunities gave you the opportunity to join a lab for a postdoc, I think. So yeah, how do you create that and foster it? Thank you so much.
Oh, that is a wonderful question. Thank you so much for that question. I would say, as far as keeping your relationships with your mentors, something about networking is that it doesn't have to be frequent communication to keep a network going. Even once a year or once every couple of years really keeps that tie. And if you have great mentors, you could in theory even go 4 or 5 years without seeing them, and then they'll still be there for you. And so some of my mentors I definitely see in the scientific community. I'll see them at a conference once a year or something like that. But something that I do, and I love this now as a mentor who has, alumni of our lab, that I love it when people do this, is just check in by email every once in a while with an update. I tell people in the group, it's like, I know you don't want to email me because you think I get too many emails. I'm always complaining about my email, right? But these are like the fun emails. Like, I love getting emails from someone in the lab just saying, hey, just checking in, want to let you know how things are going. Here's some exciting stuff that's happening. Or sometimes people will send me an email and say, hey, I'm going through this difficult situation. I'd love some advice. Can we chat? And, obviously it's never fun when someone is going through a difficult situation, but as a mentor, those are the really meaningful and fulfilling interactions for me, to be able to stay in touch with people from my group and hear how things are happening in their life, because that's really what it's all about. And so I do that with my own mentors every once in a while, just say, hey, here's what's going on. And often, especially if something big is happening, I just had this happen a couple of weeks ago. I sent an update and my PhD advisor said, let me know if you'd like to talk and if you'd like some advice about this. And it was mostly some good stuff that's happening. I said, yeah, that would be amazing. And we just had this phenomenal conversation. So I think staying in touch, and then something that's really important is that you can keep building that network too. Look for people who are in places that you want to be, and shoot them an email and say, hey, I aspire to be where you are. I really admire your career path. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk with me for a half an hour about how you got there and any advice that you have for people in my position. And especially right now, people have different commitments. So maybe everyone won't respond. But if you email 10 people with a really thoughtful email, there's a really good chance that a few will. And then you're able to build that network. And once they've invested in you that half hour, they're more likely to be a champion for you in thinking about opportunities as well.
Thank you for the great advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we finish, I have a short question. So you show us 2 pictures. One when you were student, I think you were basically women amongst men, and then you show a picture of your group where there are a few men among a group of female. So how did you get there? So you grew up in your career, but also there is a shift in the gender in the group where you are working. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Oh, I love that question. I never really consciously thought about that. In fact, a question came up recently about, kind of female faculty that you had as mentors. And as I was listening to this talk, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I never had a single female chemistry professor throughout all of my time as an undergraduate. And wow, how things have changed. That and also haven't, right? I don't think well, none of it was an intentional shift. I've seen that photo a ton of times and never looked too carefully at the gender balance. It was actually quite good for the time because my mentor was phenomenal at creating an inclusive environment and has been an amazing advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion in chemistry. I like to think that difference reflects a change in the increasing diversity in our field. It also, I think, reflects just the way that our lab approaches things, that we don't intentionally try to recruit people from any one group, but we very intentionally work to create an inclusive environment where everyone is welcomed, everyone feels a sense of belonging, and we are constantly trying to build more justice and more equity into our lab policies, build more collegiality and teamwork into how we interact with each other. And then that just creates, I think, a little bit of a self-selection in order to have a really diverse group of individuals. And I think that that's something that as a whole field, often we think that if we recruit diversity, then equity and inclusion will happen. That's not at all the case. But if we build in equity and inclusion, then diversity can become the natural result of that. And we are still far from perfect. We have so much work to do, and we're constantly trying to improve. But it's been fun to be able to build within our lab the sort of culture that we would love to see more broadly in all of academia.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you again.
Thank you.